motoring brought back to the road the prosperity of the long-vanished coaching days before the coming of the railway, and made merry England once again.
Motoring was very much a pleasure activity, and you didn't use the car to go to work normally.
The car was never used for shopping. It's strange to think today of the reasons that we use the car. It was almost in our day like your Sunday best clothes, which you certainly had, just clothes for Sunday.
You'd spend the whole of the winter fettling the car ready for next year's glorious 25th of March, which was the first day of the new quarter. And so it was normal to tax your car just for that 2 quarters of the summer months. For the rest of the time, we usually jacked it up and put some bricks under the axle or something like that to keep the tyres off the ground, and carried out all the maintenance and spibbing up that the car needed.
Only an hour's run from London, you'll see rural England at its very best. From the top of the downs, the countryside spreads out to the north like a jigsaw puzzle of fields and woods. And to the south, there's the sea sparkling beyond white cliffs.
The car began to transform the traditional British seaside holiday. Those secluded coves, far away from the nearest railway station, were being discovered, opened up, and developed into resorts. No more running for trains with heavy luggage. Now you could throw away the timetable. Even the seaside boarding houses, no children, no pets, no vacancies, were now no problem. You could bring your own tent.
We could get away each weekend during the summer. We could get the benefits of camping down by the seaside, and we thoroughly enjoyed this. And in general, it was the most enjoyable period in one's life. I have got a very nice photograph, and it really does show the sort of carefree, I suppose, abandonment of those days. Because my father was always very interested in motor cars and could always afford to buy a car within his means and always maintain it himself, it gave us a freedom to be able to get away, because you could not only take the family of 5 around, you could take all your camping gear with you, which you could not possibly have done had you had to rely on public transport.
I'd heard that you could tow a caravan behind a car. I'd never seen one, but I'd heard. One day I came home and said to my wife, well, I think I'm going to build a caravan. So she said, what a good idea. Where should we keep the horse? Now that was quite, she wasn't being funny. She imagined, of course, that if you're going to have a caravan, you had to have a horse. So, but I explained to her, no, nowadays you pull it behind a car. And I started off by drawing diagrams, doing it properly. And I was sitting at the dining room table, and we just got a new radio. Up to that point, we used cat's whiskers and earphones, but we got a real radio with a loudspeaker, straight horn that came out like that. And I was listening while I was drawing, and there was a famous singer singing a song, a gypsy song. A gypsy am I, a wandering by, I travel the road, who cares? And I said to my wife, that's the name of our caravan, who cares?
Am I, a wandering by, I travel the road, who cares?
Who indeed, when all the comforts of home could be enjoyed on the open road.
The fine streamlining effect of the caravan has been obtained without sacrificing comfort, and there's nothing cramped or lacking. It has everything you need for a holiday.
And with a caravan, she could see the world but still be tied to the kitchen stove, while he stayed firmly in the driving seat. But would she ever get her hands on the wheel? By the late 1930s, the roads were getting busy, with 500 new vehicles every day. Cars were more forgiving, with better gears and self-starters, and everybody wanted to drive them. But very few women managed to prise the male grip from the steering wheel.
You know, I've been driving now for
19 years, and I've never had an accident. yet.
I think women probably weren't given the opportunities because the men always wanted to drive whenever he was available. If he was there, he drove.
Here, come on, move over.
It was as though it was a world apart, that men drove and women didn't. Well, their place was in the home, and they wouldn't have the necessary technical skill to understand how to drive.
But since the modern girl has come to spend so much of her young life in a car, a big change has taken place in her outlook. Clothes, hair, dresses, beauty treatment and personal accessories have all been influenced by the motor car.
At times, the lady driver may find herself hopelessly baffled by some obscure engine trouble.
I never remember any point of my life before I got married where it was even suggested that I should learn to drive. And yet, as soon as my brother, who was 6 years younger, was 17, he was learning to drive and taking his test.
Of course, having two brothers, they were the ones who always wanted to get and sit by Dad. But now and again, I was lucky, and I said, "Let me drive, Dad, let me drive, please." And he'd let me get hold of the wheel, and they'd tear along, not very fast, of course, but I was pretty good at driving.
Good gear changing for a woman.
Nice compliment from a man.
You ought to hand it to the men who created a gearbox so silent and responsive.
Yes, it is rather wonderful, isn't it? All those gears and things whizzing round so quietly under one's feet.
But grudgingly, the industry had to accept that the female half of the population were not only fully competent drivers, but also potential customers.
Today, woman uses the family car to take the children to school or to drive round to the shops. The car helps her to get through her daily routine quicker. Motor car manufacturers are alive to the fact that woman today has a big share, not only in driving, but also in choosing the car. While man listens to the engine, woman is looking at the appearance, the upholstery, the color scheme, seat covers, fulfilling the craving of the feminine heart for something that can be readily cleaned.
And nothing could beat the car when it came to satisfying the cravings of her companion, who, when he wasn't busy listening to the engine, could whisk her away to secluded beauty spots, where she might be persuaded to forget those parental warnings about men in cars, even if she would bring along that dog of hers.
You couldn't do without a car when it came to courtship. I remember going to one house near Cleobury Mortimer once with some friends, and the old man wouldn't let us near the house when he saw we'd got a car, and 2 or 3 blokes in, we'd come to see his daughter. One of my friends had come to see his daughter. We were quite innocent, but he wouldn't let her out like that.
It's always been the sporty type of car which have been the main asset towards picking up a partner. If it was a little £100 Ford, she might tend to ignore that and wait for the next MG to come along.
You had a sports car, primarily to pull the girls. Oh, a number of my friends bought MGs, not for any sporting activities in the car side, but purely for courting. Mind you, they're no good for courting because there was no room.
But the modern miss receives her proposal, as likely as not, sitting in the front seat of her young man's car, or possibly it's his dad's car, which he sneaked for the occasion.
A friend of mine was forbidden by his mother to use the Humber, which was the pride of their lives. And she used to study the speedometer every night. But he found that he could go and see his girlfriend in Cirencester by going forward all the way to Cirencester, topping the tank up and reversing the whole way back. So when his mother looked at the speedometer, it was showing exactly the same mileage.
Maybe the car belongs to neither the young man or his father. Maybe it's her own. In which case, there's no doubt that the modern girl is perfectly capable of handling a proposal of marriage and a car at the same time.
But even without such distractions, there seemed to be plenty of drivers, mostly male, who could barely handle the car at all.
There are some madmen, and there's no other word for them, who try to pass on a left-hand bend. It ought to be a criminal offence. But there are some drivers who forget the opposite direction and pass not only on a bend, but on the brow of a hill as well.
During the 1930s, car ownership doubled from 1 to 2 million vehicles. Accidents increased. In the unequal struggle for road space, the motorist's freedom was being bought at the expense of the cyclist and the pedestrian. But even the car could not escape the new hazard of traffic jams.
They talk about the crowds now, but the roads were very busy then compared, because there were only two-way lanes up and down. And you'd get behind a big gang of cyclists. They used to have cycle clubs galore then. And you couldn't get past them till the road was clear. And you used to go chug, chug, chugging at the back of the cyclists. Oh, honestly. Then you'd tear off past them, and before another mile or two, there'd be another cycle club had come along.
Steady there. Even if the cyclist was wrong to pull out, two wrongs don't necessarily make one right.
In 1939, 8,272 people died in road accidents, more than twice the figure for 1994, killed by 1/10 of the traffic. More than half the victims were pedestrians. On streets that used to be their playgrounds, 1,000 children a year were being killed. But something far more lethal was about to come sweeping round the next corner, a force so powerful that it would nearly kill off motoring altogether.
Here, Dad, we're going to be late.
We knew the war was coming. We knew for sure it was coming. I think we all realised that this was the last summer, and it was a little frenzied for that reason. We all took the view we won't be doing this next year, because we'd had previous Munich, which had frightened us. We thought it was all over then, but we realised this was it.
September 39, the Second World War started, and although I think there was probably some petrol for a time, it must not have been too long before the car had to be put away for the duration of the war, because there was no way that my father was able to get petrol for leisure purposes. And that, in a way, was the loss of freedom.
Hello!
I feel so fortunate to have been a child in the 30s and to have been able to enjoy the countryside, because pleasures then were much simpler. There was much, much less traffic about. When we used to go out, it was all for leisure and pleasure and freedom. It was wonderful.
It's been a lovely day. Thank you for every minute of it.
Haven't you forgotten the car? Surely the car that takes us everywhere in such comfort deserves the credit. And you may take my word for it, dear, we were very wise when we decided to depend on an Austin.
Motor Mania.